The first presentation is going to be from Candice Kwok. Candice did her PhD looking at how to promote screening amongst Chinese Australian women, and she's going to tell us a bit about that. We'll have time for 1 or 2 questions, but mainly we'll save that for the panel. Thank you, Candice. And Candice, I should tell you, is from UWS, University of Western Sydney.
Sorry, so where is the
slides?
Yeah.
Do we have a technical person amongst us? Do you have to just click on something? Yes, here we go.
Oh, here we go. Thanks. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the presentations. And my topic today is happy and healthy life in Sydney. And it looks like, it's nothing to do with cancer, because that is what we call culturally sensitive. And that is a community partnership program for promoting cancer awareness and screening practice among Chinese Australian women. As some of you may realize that cancer is a very sensitive word or sensitive terms in Chinese culture. So in the topic, we never mention anything about disease or cancer. So that is what we call happy and healthy life in Sydney. And the aim of this presentation of this project is to develop and implement a tailor-made culturally sensitive and linguistically appropriate cancer awareness program for promoting cancer screening participation. And the second aim of this is to train a number of community health advocates to continue ongoing educational work in cancer screening practice. But this presentation is more to focus in the first aim. Okay. So maybe give you some background about cancer in Chinese culture. And in our Chinese culture, cancer is sort of carry a stigma image. And if someone got cancer, they found that it's contagious. They don't want to touch them, as they found that is the way they will get cancer. Or that is fate. If that happened, and nothing you can do about it. And that is one of the reasons they don't really like to go for the idea of screening, because they found that is no point. Okay. And the other... some myths and misconceptions about cancer screening, as they believe if there's no sign and symptoms, it's no need to go for cancer screening. Quite often, when you ask Chinese women, they thought, oh, I feel well, I can't see any reason or any possibility I will have cancer. Yeah. Or in their mind, they thought negative thinking brings negative thought. So when I did my PhD, interview some Chinese women, they think, I don't want to think of it all the time. If I keep thinking of it, that may cause it happen. So instead of early detection, they find mammogram or pap smear is the way they catch the disease. Yeah. Okay. So that is the outline of this program, Happy and Healthy Life in Sydney. So we got two phases. So the first one, we go out to different suburbs to conduct a number of linguistically appropriate and culturally sensitive cancer awareness program. And at the same time, we have advertised all these content in the ethnic media, such as Chinese newspaper and Chinese radio. And part of this phase, we have developed a take-home information kit. So we have a Chinese booklet, and we use all these Asian images to promote the screening practice. And also, part of the information kit, we have developed some written materials, such as posters and pamphlets, that we make it available in all those Chinese shops, Chinese clinic, Chinese restaurant. And I remember when I went to talk to the owner, and she said, are you kidding me? We put some cancer things in the restaurant that may affect their business. Yeah, it's funny, but that is how it works in the Chinese culture. And in the phase 2, we also recruit a number of the community organizations leader, and then to give them some training in this area, so that they can carry on the educational work because they work in the front line, and then they got more opportunities to meet all these Chinese women. Okay, so what do we use as a culturally sensitive strategies in this program or in this project? The first one, we use a role model. Yeah, we have a Chinese cancer survivors and screening participants to share the experience during the educational talk. And we use ethnic media such as newspapers, radio, and community channel. And all those educational programs were conducted in Cantonese, and all those written materials are in Chinese. And all those educational talks were conducted through the Chinese organizations. And as part of the evaluation process, we have pre and post questionnaire before and after the educational program. So we invite a group of women to come to the educational program. Before we start, we invite them to fill in a questionnaire, and after the educational program, they fill in the same questionnaire. We want to assess if any changes in their belief or knowledge. Yeah. And also, we have also the process evaluation on the intervention content. Okay, so in this slide, you can see the demographic background of our participants. So in total, we got 288 participants. So that is through, that was recruited through 7 Chinese organizations. And you can see the age distributions. So we are so glad to know that more than half of this group of women, they are aged over 40 to 69. So that is the target sample for the mammogram, at least, yeah. And in terms of the country of birth, and we will see nearly half, they're from Hong Kong, and they're mainly from Hong Kong and China. Yeah, mainly from Hong Kong and China. Okay, so that is the length of stay in Australia. And you will see more than half of them, they have been here for years, for more than 6. You see 6 to 10, we got 34.3, and 11 to 15, we got 23.2. But in line with their length of stay, you can see not many of them, they speak good English. So that means with Chinese populations, the English proficiency have not much to do with their length of stay. Even though they stay here for long, that doesn't mean they have a good English proficiency. Because most of these target group women, over age 50, they come here for the family reunion. They are grandparents. They stay here to look after the grandchildren. So it's not really surprising that they don't have the good English proficiency. Okay, so that is their screening practice. So in terms of mammogram, 68.8, they have ever heard of it. Yeah, and 39.9, they have ever performed it. Yeah, but within that target group, that means age 50 to 69, only 50% of them has performed mammogram as recommended. That means every 2 years. So 50% is not that bad in terms of, they are the ethnic groups. Yeah. And in terms of pap smear, so 77% they have ever heard of it. And 61.8% they have ever performed it. Yeah. And 42.7% they have ever performed it as recommended every 2 years. I'm not surprised with these figures because pap smear is quite common in Hong Kong. So if women from Hong Kong, I don't see the problem as big as the women from China. Yeah, for a lot of Chinese women, if they're from China, they more likely, they never heard of what is pap smear, and they don't really worry about cervical cancer. Yeah. Okay. And so that is the questionnaire, the result. So that is, you can see the first 4 is the questions that we ask women before and after. Yeah. And the result shows that the first 3, we got the statistical significance result. So the first one, is breast cancer is a leading cause of cancer among females in Australia. Yeah. And the second one, we asked them, breast cancer is like a death sentence. If you get it, you will surely die from it. Yeah. And the third one, if a woman feels well, she doesn't need to worry about getting breast cancer. So in these 3 questions, we see the significant change before and after the program. But not with the 4th one, which is if a woman have no physical signs and symptoms, there is little change that she will have breast cancer. Okay. And in terms of the correct answer for age group of women should have a mammogram regularly. So before the program, we got 120 women. They know the correct answer. Yeah, and after the program, we got 237 out of 288. It's a promising result. Yeah.
Goodness, 2 minutes?
Yes.
2 minutes?
Sorry. Okay. And in terms of cervical cancer, and you will see this is the questions we asked them. And we got the first and the third and the fourth one, we got the significant change before and after the program. Yeah. And one I found really promising is only women who have more than one sexual partners will get cervical cancer. As a lot of Chinese women, they believe if I only have my husband in my life, one man in my life, I never get any chance to get cervical cancer. That's why I don't need pap smear. Yeah. And okay, and that is the program evaluation. The majority of them, they found the presentation presented is easy to understand. Yeah, as we use simple word, as simple as they can understand. Yeah. And the next one, I found that illustrations, explanations, and samples presented in this program were useful, and the majority of them they found that is they strongly agree. Yeah. And the conclusion. So the program design has been effective in addressing cancer myth among Chinese Australian women. And we found this model having a take-home information kit and then using the ethic media, which is proved to be useful, practical, and culturally sensitive in Chinese Australian community. Thank you.
Thank you, Candice. So I think this is a really inspiring way of doing culturally appropriate health practice. Does anybody have a burning question? Because otherwise we might save it to the panel. Any burning questions? All right. Thank you, Candice. We'll have an opportunity to discuss it again in the panel. So I'd like to welcome up to the podium Lynn. Lin Philipson comes from the University of Wollongong, and she's going to tell us more about the Macedonian and Serbian communities in relation to screening.
Thank you. I think we've got slightly less time, so mine's a bit of a snapshot summary, and I really wanted to give the audience today a good feel about what we think are the important steps and processes when we go to working with culturally diverse communities and how they might differ, particularly in the context of doing things like research and evaluation to what we might be used to when we're working with other groups and communities. So our project was funded similarly by a Cancer Institute grant, as was Candice's, and we were all tasked with this job of trying to actually address stigma and promote help seeking or improve outcomes somehow in these communities that were considered to be priority communities in relation to their current cancer outcomes. And in the Illawarra, when we first saw this call for grants to come out, we at the university approached our regular partners, the Multicultural Health Service at the local health district, to say, okay, these are interesting grants. Who do we think in our community are at that point where they're ready to be thinking about the issues of stigma, where it's an issue that have cancer outcomes that perhaps could be improved? How are the local resources ready and positioned to work if we're going to put in an intervention? We're going to think about building towards sustainability. And how do we ascertain from communities that we think might be priorities in our local area whether they actually want an intervention like this to occur in their communities in the next 12 months? And as a result of extensive consultation and working with multicultural health care workers, we decided we would work with the Serbian and Macedonian communities for this project. And we were very lucky to have the bicultural health workers, and we know from the evidence around working with culturally diverse communities that working with bicultural health workers is one of those factors that does tend to improve outcomes in relation to cancer interventions. So Zaga Jakulia and Anitsa Petkovsky were our two health workers that were with us on this project, and Lisa Pitts is here, who's the manager of the Multicultural Health Service as well. We also worked with our cancer care services, so our hospital and community care providers, the southern region of Cancer Care New South Wales, and in close consultation with the Cancer Institute throughout this project. So, cancer good news. I thought we were talking about bad news. Well, certainly when we started this process of consultation with our communities and were looking to establish community support. When we began our consultations with the Serbian and Macedonian communities, it was very clear that in both of those communities that cancer was strongly associated with fear, and most of the time with bad news for people who were given the diagnosis or in fear of the diagnosis, or had family members or loved ones who had experienced a diagnosis of cancer. So stigma was a real issue, and taboo was a big issue in these two communities. However, when we spoke to them, they really did talk to us about the fact that they were ready to think about ways of trying to improve outcomes and begin to talk about cancer as well. So we put in an application for our grant, and one of the first things we did was to try and understand what were the particular issues of stigma in these communities, and what were the real heart issues that we really needed to try and address if we were going to try and reduce stigma. So we started by conducting research, formal research with these communities, and we did some focus groups. And I think we had about 90 members across the two communities that participated in this initial round of focus groups. So stigma in health is usually associated with negative beliefs about the disease, and often about the attributes then of people that have that kind of disease as well. So people that particular health conditions become stigmatised, and therefore people that have those health conditions can feel stigma associated with them. Goffman tells us that stigma is something that is felt, so something that is experienced by people with particular health conditions, and it can also be enacted. So people with particular health conditions might feel discriminated against. So we went into our focus groups with these two particular concepts to say, how did people in our communities feel or experience stigma if they were suffering from cancer, and how did it look like these stigma attitudes and beliefs were actually enacted within the communities as well. Okay, so in our communities we heard that cancer was associated with negative beliefs. While some people knew about the causes of cancer, it was mostly associated with death, not treatment or survival. And this concept of curse and destiny that Candice spoke about within the Chinese communities was there as well. So people felt very disempowered by cancer. There was very little that they could do in their lives to prevent themselves or stop themselves from coming in contact with this bad luck. So this really led to, the community members told us, fear and silence around cancer. People told us that they didn't tend to attend screening rates, and they presented late with symptoms for disease because of this sense of helplessness. There's nothing we can do. If cancer is to come, if this is God's plan, then this is my destiny, this is what will happen. So people did feel stigma when they got cancer. There was a sense of shame and humiliation and isolation associated with the experience of cancer. And there was silence. People didn't tend to talk to other people when they got cancer. They didn't often even talk about it within family groups. In relation to the enacting of stigma, though, when we talked with other people about how they felt when they knew that community members had cancer, their silence tended to be more related around what we consider to be courtesy stigma. So there was embarrassment, not wanting to upset people, okay? Rather than direct discrimination and saying that person is bad, or for instance in the Chinese community, contagious, those beliefs weren't evident in ours. There was just that sense of awkwardness around it. So we really felt that there was also work to be done around trying to make people feel more comfortable with the idea of discussing cancer. So it was really time for good news in these communities. Time for some good news about cancer, not just about bad news. So I've got, I think, 1 minute to take you through a process. We did this research, and we were very committed to working with our communities and developing strategies that actually really fit with the community we were working with. So we went back and we consulted with them. We told them the stories we heard. We talked to them about the sorts of strategies that worked in other communities, and we decided together how we were going to go about trying to begin to reduce stigma around cancer within the two communities. So one of the big factors, so we've got our little fellow up the top, here's our starting point. Cancer is the one that can't be cured, an evil, a curse, there's nothing we can do about it. And then after talking with the communities, we end up with this idea about it. Actually, we need a bit more information to overcome our fears. We need to talk a bit more about cancer. This is the feedback we got from the cancer. And we need to start telling our stories of survival. So what we heard from the communities was that people only heard about someone having cancer when they died. So even when people had cancer, were successfully treated, and actually overcome cancer, they didn't tell anybody about it. So the members of these communities were rarely actually working with community members to see whether people, and this is a stigmatised condition, were prepared to come forward and start to tell their stories. And we, over time, building trust and all those sorts of things, actually had community members come forward and share stories that we've now been able to embed within the resources that we've developed for these communities. Community-based presentations, newsletters, a website, radio scripts, all of these were designed around the stories of the people. So we have a series of resources. We're hearing stories about stigma decreasing, and our little element of us starting to talk to a small group of people, our little project logo and those stories spreading. We're running a bit more of a full-scale campaign, which is about to be launched within our communities so that we can take our resources to a greater number of people, and that includes, a bit like Candace's, working with ethnic media, putting resources on websites, all in language as well as in English, bit of use of social media.
And I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk more about this in the panel, but I better stop you. And it's very hard for someone who's so passionate to be only given 3 minutes to talk about it. But is there anything you want to just close with, or we can...
Oh, no, that's fine. So in terms of evaluation, the research around this, we don't have all that evidence that John Emery spoke about. We actually did the similar review for the Cancer Institute about the evidence in called populations. So our little diagram tells you that we're going to continue to collect evaluation, and we really want to have a look at the difference in outcomes for our community depending on which part of the process they participated in. So were they involved with us from the beginning? Did they participate in the focus groups? Did they share their stories? Did they come to our forums? Did they read our newsletters? And see if we can work out which components of that intervention actually help us be effective in reducing stigma.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome Astrid. Astrid Perry is from the South Eastern Health District Multicultural Health Service, and they've been doing some really interesting work developing theatre to talk about cancer in Arabic, Greek and Macedonian-speaking communities.
And I won't be using a PowerPoint as it's only 3 minutes. So this is about the Alive and Out There project that we also had funded from the Cancer Institute. And I've got here Lynn Baker as well, who was the project officer for part of the project. This is a theatre-based health promotion project. So as far as the literature and our clinical kind of work, that's where it fits. We've went for this methodology because we already had developed a fear and shame play on stigma and mental health. And we had that formally evaluated with over 200 interviews in Macedonian around whether it triggered talking in the community, whether people were more likely to go and see a doctor, whether they were more likely to discuss their mental health issues with the family and friends, and whether they're generally more able to disclose that they had a mental illness. So knowing that cancer has a similar sort of stigma in the communities, we decided to apply for funding for 3 communities, the Arabic, the Greek and the Macedonian communities, to develop 3 plays that deal with cancer and stigma. So our rationale around those communities was that we knew they had under-screening, they were late presenters, they had a stigma just from our work with multicultural communities, we knew that, and the clinicians told us so as well, and they had a history of theatre, so it was something that was embedded in their communities already. We used research type of methodology to develop the script. So we had focus groups with service providers to kind of find out the issues that they see in their everyday life dealing with these communities and cancer issues. We had focus groups with the communities to understand the stigma better and know what is it exactly that is a problem for them to not be able to discuss it. And it's similar, as Lynn said. We talked to a survivor group. There's an Arabic survivor group at St. George Hospital, so cancer survivor group. They were happy to talk about how it was for them. We did some community interviews individually, one-on-one. Now, when I say we, this is not necessarily the Multicultural Health Service. These are the people, the theatre groups contracted to deliver the plays. And we actually have 3 individual, quite unique plays that evolved out of this process. So we had then draft scripts that we vetted in the medical sense to make sure that the messages in the scripts are correct, because the communities develop them themselves, as I said. So as for the content, and you're welcome to look at two of the plays, at the Multicultural Community Project stall. So they're there on the laptops, and there's numerous photos on the panel if you want to have a little taste. All of them have a level of family drama in it, or drama with friends. They're quite humorous, a lot of comedy in it. There is weddings, there's broken engagement, and there's families that had the diagnosis, and families that had treatment, and families that dealt better with it, and families that might have couldn't talk about it, and that kind of thing. And it all plays out in integrated plays, so it's fantastic. One of the plays talks about a person, or evolves around a person that disappeared. And they disappeared because they didn't want to talk to anyone about the cancer. So while they were in treatment in hospital, they actually said that to some people they said they're going to Queensland for holidays, and to other people they said that they went to China. And the community thought they're having a girlfriend. It was a man, a father, or a grandfather. Anyway, the daughter went looking for him, and it turned out he was in hospital, and it was based on a true story. So there's some really interesting stuff in those plays, so I really highly recommend to have a bit of a look. And the Greek one is still running, so you can see it in Marrickville, Addison Road, at the Greek Theatre if you want. And at the stall there are some posters. Now, we embedded, the key messages were embedded particularly around screening, checkups, talk about it, the role of friends and families for supporting you if you did have cancer. All those things kind of played out. We reached 3,000 people or so. The Arabic performance was only two times in English, 2 times in their language. The Macedonian was once in English, 5 times in their language. And the Greek is 12 times with subtitles in English. And they work very well, trust me, you can follow everything. So we finished, apart from the Greek performances, they're pretty much finished. But our next step is we filmed them all, or will film them all. 3 in English, so each one in English, and then each one in their own language. And we're going to use them with community groups to trigger discussion around cancer and around stigma, and what they thought was true and not true in the play, and how it is in their community and their family, and so on and so on. So we're developing a little training booklet that goes with each of the scripts. Each of the shows, yep. Just about finished, yep. And an e-learning tool for the clinicians where we take some footage out as well. In terms of evaluations, they were very well received. Anything in the language is often well received anyway, but people felt they were very authentic. They picked up loud and clear the messages around screening, go to the doctor, talk about it. And we had some surprise responses for the communities in that the community was talking about, and people were following up with us to say, oh, I missed the play, when can I get the DVD? Or others saying, you must go there and see the play, and so on. So obviously the community is talking about it, which is what we wanted. Thanks.
Thank you. Very interesting. And our last speaker is Mamta Singh from the Cancer Council of New South Wales, and she's going to talk about some work done in schools with younger people. It's around hepatitis B, but I'm sure we can learn a lot from it for cancer.
Thanks, Phyllis. Sorry, I don't have slides either because you're going to be quick and short. My name is Mamta. I'm the program manager for the Hepatitis B positive program at the Cancer Council New South Wales. We were one of the grant recipients of the Stigma, Myths and Misconception Reduction Project from the Cancer Institute mid-last year. So the overall objective of our project was to engage youth from culturally and linguistically diverse communities in addressing some of the existing myths and misconceptions in the stigma related to chronic hepatitis B and liver cancer. To give a bit of a context to the topic, there are estimated 218,000 Australians living with chronic hepatitis B. That is approximately 1% of the total population. More than 80% of people living with chronic hepatitis B were infected at birth or in early childhood. approximately 100,000 aren't aware that they have the disease. This results in poor outcomes for many of those affected, leading to liver cancer and liver failure. Hepatitis B virus is 50 to 100 times more infectious than HIV, and the risk of ongoing transmission to other susceptible people remains high because people aren't aware that they have the disease. Liver cancer is one of the is the fastest rising cause of cancer death in Australians, and with increasing incidence, it sits on the top 10 causes of cancer death with less than 5-year survival for those affected. This is why prevention of liver cancer, was particularly by screening people for viral hepatitis, is an emerging public health priority. So with our projects, we divided them into 2 segments. So we took the teaching to classroom, where we worked with high school students, especially newly arrived youth from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, to raise their awareness about and knowledge about the chronic hepatitis B and its link to liver cancer. So this project, we worked with Fairfield Intensive English Center. So it's a school where newly arrived students to the country study there for about 1 year. This project involved youth and their parents and their carers who are also from high prevalence countries of hepatitis B and liver cancer, including those from Vietnamese, Chinese, Cambodian, Iranian, Hong Kong, Laotian, and Iraqi background. So youth developed a wonderful resource, which is an 8-minute video telling people about what is hepatitis B. They're learning in the whole process as well. And they also developed this amazing booklet, which they took home to their parents to show in terms of what they had learned. And the second project that we worked on was specifically with Vietnamese youth from Vietnamese background, because people born in Vietnam are at 12 times higher risk of being diagnosed with liver cancer compared to Australian-born population. So we therefore engaged more than 100 youth from Vietnamese background in making an innovative soap opera format movie titled Change of Our Lives, which was launched on the 27th of July this year in the light of World Hepatitis Day. Over 500 community members attended the screening. There were 2 cinemas going at the same time. And people absolutely loved it because it was in a funny format, but at the same time educational, which told them about what was hepatitis. It's about a family story which is followed on. The evaluations were great, and it was wonderful. So there's a screening running at the Cancer Council on the 5th of September at 12 o'clock, so if you're interested to have a look. Also, we've got the laptops downstairs. You can have a look at the making of the film, of how the youth were involved and how they learned about Hep B and liver cancer.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Now, I'd like to invite all 4 speakers. We need one more chair. If one of you can bring a chair with you for the panel discussion. There's a mic in the middle of the room there, so if you've got a question, please just stand up and have a use it. Perhaps just briefly introduce yourself. So we've got about 20 minutes now to talk about some of these issues. And perhaps while you're thinking about questions, I would like to ask the panel, how much do you think these issues of stigma and shame are specific to particular cultural groups? Because I think they're also quite widespread amongst Anglo-Australians. But anyway, I just thought I'd like to ask you to comment on that.
I'm happy to go first. I think that's true to some degree, that they're spread across all communities. At my age, I remember the reaction as a young woman when somebody else had cancer in my community. I'm from Switzerland. Very Western country, I guess. And there was this kind of cancer, and the kind of leap to the death sentence stuff was very strong. But having said that, there was much less of the kind of superstition, God kind of, that's my fate, so I'll have to just accept it, and therefore I won't go to the doctor or all of those things. So I think there's layers around that. So the leap to the death sentence, I think, in all communities, the level of scaredness, the level of threat to mortality and bringing that in your face and all that, I think that is very strong and a human thing, I guess, but the kind of layers that prevents people from not going to see doctors, not going to screening and all that, I think that's for some ethnic communities much stronger than others.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Lynn or Canis would like to comment on that?
I was just going to say, I think you're right. I think there are stigmas in all cultural groups, and there's certainly fear in all cultural groups. But I think we've had a lot more effort put into the telling of survivor stories, and there are new norms being developed around survivors of breast cancer. I think is probably one of our strongest stories, and because a lot of cultural groups aren't hearing those stories coming from their own communities, there's still less hope. It actually potentially increases their sense of the fact that perhaps their luck is worse than others, and that their outcomes are worse. So I think we need to learn from what has actually worked to turn around some of those norms, particularly in providing people with hope, and be doing more around actually allowing people to hear some of those stories from within their own community. And
just realising that not everybody accesses those sorts of stories that we hear in our communities.
Absolutely.
Any other comment from Mamta or Canis?
I think as in Chinese culture, it's still really true, even for the young generation, and cancer is regarded as a really contagious disease, and particularly when cancer patients, when they are on active treatment, they think if I have any contact with them, I will catch the disease, and they have that feeling. So as a consequence, people doesn't want to tell friends or outside the family they got cancer, as they find really it's a shame. Yeah. Mm.
So it's important to know that for us to be able to intervene. Any questions from the audience? Feel brave, yes?
My name's Francis, and yes, I consult to the Institute. Look, I'm just great strategies and research that's taking place in these groups, but how do we actually translate these strategies to the broader cultural group or population groups, because your sample sizes are relatively small, and obviously you can't infer this for general populations or called populations. So, what do we do to target broader, what can we do in terms of strategies to target much wider audiences?
It's a very good question.
I might go. I did the review for the Cancer Institute around reviewing the rapid review. So the parallel one to what John Emery did, our team from the Illawarra, we actually tried to look at the culturally diverse issues, that the evidence that exists for how we improve outcomes in culturally diverse populations. And I think when you look at broader models of stigma, one of the ways we can look at that is in relation to investments in research. And it's really difficult for us to produce a really nice, neat model for you, because actually we don't have that same strength of evidence to actually say, well, on the basis of 5 systematic reviews of level 1 evidence, we can tell you these are the things that work. And that actually needs to be highlighted as one of the areas of discrimination in the context of the system discriminating against culturally diverse groups, and the need for organisations and governments to actually invest very seriously in helping us develop the evidence to be able to provide you with really clear recommendations.
And funders don't like CALD research because it's more expensive, because you have to translate things and, have the consultative processes, often have interpreters. They don't like it, so it is difficult to get funding, isn't it?
That said, there are some real principles of good ways of working with communities that we do know anecdotally actually help us improve outcomes. So I've spoken, so I'll let someone else actually share those.
I was just going to say, when have you seen the last comprehensive media campaign in another language? I mean, part of it is, like Lynn said, the information is actually not out there, the facts are not out there, and the facts have to be out there in a way that can be appreciated and taken on board. And that means, a strong SBS campaign, for example, in other languages, if we want to be serious about this. Certainly our project and Lynn's projects and other projects, they have strategies to take that out into the communities, but it possibly goes only so and so far. But yeah, I mean, those projects will be alive and out there. That's why we called our thing Alive Out There. It came out of a conversation like this for a while yet, you know. But it is true. It does cost money if we want to do it well. But a lot of the strategies you use for other people would work as well for ethnic communities if we invested into them.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of translating things and having, you know, a model from your own community to look at and identify with as well, isn't it? Yeah. And then you can use the standard approaches. Did I see a hand? Yes.
Hi, yes, I'm Brenda Casperin. I'm president of an association called Cancer Counselling Professionals. And we've been looking at trying to get counsellors across New South Wales, and specifically, more recently, looking at the CALD community and getting counsellors into it. The difficulty we're experiencing is that even though we have a Vietnamese counsellor, even though we have a Chinese counsellor, even though we have 2 Arabic counsellors, is that those members from those communities do not actually want to access that counsellor. There seems to be a stigma associated with the community, and it's such a difficult process because you're wanting people to be culturally sensitive and aware of how that community perceives cancer, but at the same time they don't want to see counsellors within their own, you know, that have knowledge of their own communities. And yeah, I suppose it's a question. One, I'm having great difficulty, and again now, especially with Aboriginal counsellors as well, Aboriginal clients. And I suppose one of the questions last weekend went to a workshop on cultural diversity for Aboriginal clients, and I suppose the theme of that was person first, cultural second. What really came in out of that for me out of that workshop, and I was just wondering if you'd like to comment on that, and perhaps on some of the difficulties I'm facing. Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
You go first.
Oh. I guess you just brought one of the strongest examples about stigma. It's exactly right. They don't want to go to the ethnic-specific counsellor because they're worried that it'll go around the community. And because it's such a big stigma, they don't want it to go around the community. So there are ways of working for their counsellors to get trust first before they do counselling. So it's a lengthy process, and our bilingual workers are probably better placed to talk about that and how they do that in a practical sense. But it's something that bilingual ethnic workers face all the time, and it really takes that establishing of trust. And then people will come, and they might not come to the counselling setting. They might do it in another time when they feel after a function and say, look, I did want to ask you that question a long time ago, or so on. So you've got to actually be embedded in the community, not sitting in an office waiting for referrals and things like that. It is a complex matter, and I do understand your frustration. It's very difficult. And the other thing we do though is offer also, so it's a whole team approach. And sometimes people say, I'd rather see the Australian counsellor because of that trust issue, because they would think that the Australian counsel doesn't have connections in the community. And that's okay. You know, everybody's got to be able to approach it the way they feel most comfortable with it.
And I just have a little comments back to the last questions about the model. So that's why, because we got so many ethnic groups in Australia, and we got, we have that, strategies out there and message out there, and it's not the matter of translating, the current message into the languages. So to me, it's taking their cultural belief and their background into account in that information that they can take it on board. For example, you talk to the Chinese people about risk factor. They will say, look, my dad, he smoked for 90 years, he's still alive. Yeah. So you can't talk to them about, in terms of risk factor. That doesn't adhere to their cultural background. So that's why I don't believe it's a common model that can apply to everyone in the societies. Yeah. So back to the just that questions about the counselor. Again, for example, in Chinese culture, it carries stigma, just like the disease, cancer. They don't want to talk to anyone outside the family. Don't mention about counseling. It's hard, but I believe that's why we need to have the culturally sensitive strategies to target them, and to me, it's a long-term process. We can't say, oh, let's go screening, and let's go to talk to anyone or the counselor about that. It's a long-term process, and to me, we are at the beginnings. Yeah.
I absolutely agree as well. And even in our experience, where we've tried getting community members to come and attend talk on, say, hepatitis B, but there's still so much stigma attached to it. So we had to change the way we spoke about it. We called it a liver wellness session or a liver wellness forum. And when you speak a different language, I guess, which kind of resonates with the community members, it works a lot better. And secondly, the point that I wanted to make was the youth work, where when we developed the film, it wasn't an easy process to go and find 100 youth who would be interested in a health-related topic. So finding those community connectors who are actually well-known and well-respected within the community and working with them, so whether it is bilingual educators or whether it is health education officers who know their community a lot better than going cold. So that's what I think was good.
I think there's something to be said about testing and doing formative research. So if we're talking about the translation of mainstream strategies, then it might not just be a case of translation, it might be a case of reframing. So I think if we could pull together a couple of principles where we talk about consultation and testing and then translation, because say for something like your counselling service, do we know that those communities are actually want a counselling service? And if they did want one, what are the key factors for them? So what are the benefits when we promote that service that actually really resonate with them? And what are their concerns about that service? So it might actually change the way we deliver the service, and it certainly might change the way that we promote the service in terms of reinforcing the benefits that really resonate within that community, and actually encouraging them that if it is an issue of confidentiality or something, that the messaging around that service and that the structure and delivery of that service actually does reward the users of the service with those things that are most important to them. So not just translation, but testing and adaptation and then translation.
Absolutely.
I was wondering how much we can look to the country of origin, so how cancer messages are delivered, say, in Hong Kong and China to their own communities, and how counselling services, might be delivered within the home country. What do you think about that? Can we learn from that?
I think back to if it's in Hong Kong or China, all these kind of services, you have to use it and then use your own money. So people doesn't have that practice, to go out first. People doesn't used to go outside the family to get help. Second, they found that it's too expensive. Yeah, and then they got the financial, factors into account back to their home countries. Yeah.
So the health system's different,
so
we
it's
can't,
too expensive.
We can't translate.
Yeah.
I think, we do look sometimes at the other countries to see what happens there, but we don't use directly translated material without having it rechecked. I guess it's just a responsibility as health workers. We can't just, if we don't know whether it's a reliable site and all of that. But we do, particularly the bilingual workers, they often know whether there's also some things in their communities or not. And look, it's very true that our communities here, they are in a time warp, so they really still behave like 30 years ago whenever they migrated, and it is sometimes a useful thing to do and say, look, this is from your country, so they're obviously in your country, this is being discussed, debated and all of that. It's sometimes a good strategy if you know that country is actually advancing that way, but people often don't know what's going on in that country anymore, and they just live the way they lived in those days. So the stigma is actually here in Australia potentially much stronger than in their own communities back home.
Yeah. Any other? Yes, Nicole?
You have to excuse me, I've lost my voice this morning, so I'm going to squeak my way through the question. Just building on that idea of translational research, I wonder whether any of you looked at models from other chronic health conditions like diabetes or heart disease, and in terms of, I noticed that the hepatitis message was around liver health, and whether any of the messages you're trying to convey could be around prevention of things like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, healthy messages about lifestyle changes, and whether that's another approach, and whether anyone would like to comment on that.
Yeah, we did look. There have been quite successful campaigns in San Francisco where they've targeted particular communities and very large-scale campaigns, and they've been quite successful because they've, one aspect was youth being engaged in the whole process, as well as working very closely with community-based organizations. But the problem here in Australia is that, especially for Vietnamese community, there are no set structured organizations that we can work with because, first of all, there's a language barrier, and secondly, people do not usually access those organizations as they are sort of for their need of information. So we had to work with in a different way and go working with the more with the bilingual workers who actually know the community very well, rather than working with organizations. But definitely in the US, there's been a lot of good success being done. Yeah. Anyone else?
One of my friends works for AMES, which is one of the big providers of education for migrants when they first arrive, and many migrants when they first come are put into English-speaking programs for that extra support. And she's developed a program of using health messages as part of the curriculum when they're learning English when they first arrive here. And I thought that was a terrific idea. In terms of delivering a wider population-based type message, if you can get it into the curriculum at that level where certainly not everybody, but quite a lot of people who come here might go through, that might be one way of getting messages across.
Yeah, that's what, with our youth project, that's where we worked with the Fairfield IEC, which is the Intensive English Centre, where the youth stay there for about a year and learn English. Yeah. And that's where we worked with the youth, and our community educator and a nurse took them through the process, and they might be able to talk to you more about it.
Is it still going, Mamta? Is it?
Unfortunately, it was only a terms project, so we finished with that. But we had another grant, and we're working with the Cabramatta High School now, doing a similar sort of project. So,
So just in terms of diabetes and heart health, the stigma is not the same. There's no question about it. In fact, with diabetes, I think it's a bit of a badge of honor of saying, oh, I've got a little bit of sugar. You know, it's kind of just the right unwellness. It's just the right thing for when you're older to say, oh, yeah, I'm all right, just a little bit of sugar. I see the bilingual colleagues nodding. I know Lisa and you have done a cardiac kind of project as well, so maybe you want to catch up with them. We are doing at the moment a literature search around self-management and chronic disease, so if you give me your name after that, I'll be happy to share that. What we find is the adherence to some self-management regime, and in a way to healthy living it applies also. People might know that they should do more exercise or should do this or should do that, but to embed it in everyday life is more the issue. So we thought like along your way, we thought let's have a literature search first and see whether in other countries some things have worked around self-management and prevention regimes and that sort of thing with cult communities. But it's very early day with chronic disease, but we do know that the engagement is quite different, but it's not because of stigma in most of the diseases. Yeah, thanks.
Any last question? Is there someone at the back?
Hi, good morning. Is that on? Yep. I'm in allied health, and one thing that I'm finding is with an age where social media has become so prevalent, and we're dealing with a multicultural background that's really an ageing population, and they don't utilise those forms of communication. Do you find that it's actually harder to get the message across, and can you utilise other strategies to get the message through perhaps younger generations through social media chains, or through other communication channels that perhaps the older generations can't access and then forward the message that way? Or how do you tackle the change in the way that things are communicated?
Sorry, I can go first. So absolutely, with youth, our Facebook page, we established a Facebook page it was called the B+ Agents of Change, and it was fantastic. It went viral with posts all over. I mean, some of it was funny because it was youth involved and talking about the issue, but I guess giving them the messages and telling them there is this tool, this movie that's coming up, and it's really funny, it's interesting. The youth taking it back home to their parents saying, so and so day is the screening, cancel all your appointments, and we have to go, and that's how we got over 500 people come to the screening. So I guess getting through youth via social media is really a key, because nowadays that's how you communicate with them.
Yeah, that is what we do in Chinese community as well. So when if we have a participant and she's too young for mammogram, but we emphasize that she can translate that message to the generation, to the older generation, their mums or grandmoms. Yeah, that is what we use in Chinese community as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is quite important to look at the second generation, and so when we do translation, we always say that the English has to go along with the other translation, because the younger generation can't necessarily read the language. We do have more challenges these days because of the multimedia platform too for older people. For example, it was very clear that people would listen to SBS radio and they would watch SBS TV. Now, much more likely, they watch a commercial TV channel in their own language from their own country or wherever around the world, and the selection is so much higher that it's actually much harder to target people for messages. But having said that, there is still in some cultures, there's still very strong newspaper reading and so on. So the ethnic media is still important for that older generation. And they don't always listen to the younger people, we're all parents and maybe grandparents and whatever, and how well do we listen to our own younger people? So a multi-strategy, I guess, is really important, yeah.
So I think the message is coming out that nothing is simple.
No.
I'd like to thank our 4 fantastic speakers. It was a great session.